Welcome to Learning to Glow, a show about wellness, skin health, and self-development. I'm your host, Jess. I'm a mom, entrepreneur, and skincare expert. I'm so excited to share tips on how to achieve healthy skin and bring amazing guests in the field of health, fitness, aging gracefully, and personal growth. Let's explore all different ways we can take care of ourselves as women, both inside and out, to truly shine. So let's get glowing. Hello and welcome to episode 94 of Learning to Glow. In this episode, we are diving into a really cool and very overlooked topic and part of our bodies, which is fascia. Rahe is the founder of GST Body. She joins us today to break down what fascia is and why it matters, how it plays a huge role in keeping us moving, flexible, and pain-free. Anna spent 25 years learning how to care for this powerful tissue, and she's here to share how our lifestyle habits, stress, and even how we sit impacts our fascial health. Get ready to learn simple ways to keep your body feeling amazing. We talk about boosting mobility and reducing pain even. Anna is incredible. I learned so much in this episode. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. I learned a lot. I also want to share an update on my sheets that I mentioned a couple weeks ago. And now that I've had them for a few more weeks, I wanted to share a little bit of an update. And I shared that I had tried this new set from a brand called Cozy Earth. This is not a paid ad, by the way. This is just something I wanted to share because I feel like this is such a relevant topic for our podcast, and how sleep is just, it matters when it comes to our health in literally every way. We even talk about it in today's episode where our sleep affects fascia. So, and the health of our fascia, which we'll get into today. It's so interesting. But it is really incredible to see a difference in my sleep, because I think the biggest thing that I've noticed with these sheets is that it's the breathability of it. It keeps me like a few degrees cooler, and I just see a better quality sleep. So that was surprising to me. I just feel like I'm a little bit more comfortable overall because of how breathable they are, and I just can't believe what a difference it's been making. So these sheets are made with a really soft viscose derived from sustainable bamboo. Feel super luxurious. These sheets also have a 10-year warranty. And another cool thing that I've noticed is that with each wash, they have just become softer, which I love that. So they were very generous to offer Learning to Glow listeners 40% off code. That is huge. And you can try out their products with this huge discount using code GLOW at checkout, GLOW. If you are looking for holiday gifts, they also have really great pajamas and other items that would make such a great gift, especially with such a big discount. So you can go to cozyearth.com/learning to glow and use code GLOW, GLOW, for 40% off. Thank you so much. And here is Anna. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Learning to Glow. We have guest Anna with us. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks, Jess. It's so nice to be here. I appreciate you having
So
me.
happy to have you. I'm so excited to have you. We are going to talk about fascia today and boosting mobility. And this is really fun for me because we've never talked about this on my podcast.
Cool.
So I'm very excited. But before we get into all that good stuff, if you could just introduce yourself and tell us what you do.
Okay, hi, I'm Anna Rahe, and I run a company, a health and wellness company called GST Body. It is the life passion and purpose of my last 25 years of trying to find answers to body problems and health issues that I was having. And we deal exclusively with whole body care through fascia, which is kind of unknown by most people. It's now becoming a little bit of a hotter trend, and people are starting to be familiar with it. But that's what I've done, 25 years just using this biotechnology that I created to be able to work with the tissues. It's very specialized body tissue that has requirements that it needs, and needs actually to be taken care of specifically. And most of our lifestyle habits damage this tissue. So that's what I do. I try to help people get their lives back through being in healthy, pain-free bodies.
I love it. I'm so excited. When we were just talking before we hit record, I used to work in a medical clinic in LA, and I worked with a very talented massage therapist, and she was the first person to tell me about
Mm.
fascia. I had never heard of
Yeah.
it before. And this was
Yeah.
like in 2005.
Okay.
So I was like, oh, this is so cool. And she was like, just really knew about the body. And I feel like the people that I've come across that really know the body really well and can help women, both women and men with the body. They've talked about it, and I've been around it a little bit just because of the industry that I'm in. But
That is.
I know so many people do not know what fascia is. So if we could just start with that, what is it?
What is this podcast today about?
Right.
Oh my gosh. So, fascia is what it's being called. It's a kind of body tissue that is prolific everywhere inside the body. And that's what most people are kind of identifying it as is fascia, canopy term. It's kind of like explaining the shirt that you're wearing is made from cotton. It's a generic body tissue until you start getting deeper into what it's doing as a full body system inside of your body. But this like kind of specialized tissue, it looks like gooey gel like water filled spider web all over your body, inside your skin. It layers from your skin down into your muscle. It wraps around your muscles. It wraps around your organs. It even wraps around your veins, your nerve endings. It is literally everywhere inside the body. And it has constantly, kind of like historically been discarded as superfluous tissue to try to get to the bigger organs that looked way more exciting and way more like what's going on inside there. So we're like, the heart, that's exciting. The connective tissue kind of feels like it's just connecting things and it's in my way. So we've kind of had a history of discarding it until recently. And I'd say like in the last 20 years is when practitioners, especially it started in the manual therapy space, which is why your massage therapist was really into it. And it's now moving more into the movement space, which is what I kind of occupy on how to manipulate tissue. And this tissue is delicate. It's 70% water and 30% fiber, which is a game changer in terms of what the body needs to be able to take care of this tissue. It sets up a whole different kind of list of ingredients. Rather than thinking of it as like a fiber, we need to think about it like a fluid. And so that
Mm.
changes how it's even structured, because its general structure from its cellular level is that of like a lattice, and yet it's gooey and held together by not hyaluronic acid, by a water type molecule that is giving its form and shape. So it's kind of this interesting tissue, but most of us focus on it from a muscular skeletal realm, which is like the myofascia, but fascia is organizing a whole body system. So similar to for the listener, similar to the way your digestive system has different organs, like it goes from your stomach and then enters the small intestine and then touches the spleen and and it progresses through, or your vascular system has different organs like your heart and your lungs. The connective tissue system that is made up of fascia is actually a whole body system that takes care of everything. There's an organ, the way that the fascia organizes around your muscular skeletal system. That organ is called the myofascia. There's a way that the fascia organizes around your vital organs called your viscera. There's a way that it organizes around your veins and around your endocrine system. And so it has its own organs, but these aren't massed organs, right? Like your heart and lungs. They're layered, and they're deeply layered between all different types of systems. So there's not an area of your body truly that fascia is not touching and communicating with and touching and trying to influence. And so it's a pretty big deal when it comes to whole body health.
Okay. Okay. That's, thank you for breaking it down like that. So you mentioned that there are certain lifestyle habits that can make this
Mm-hmm.
unhealthy, I guess, if you could say, like
Mm-hmm.
the fascia in the body. And I'd love to know like some of those, and also what what are the consequences of that? Like if we're suffering from like our fascia not being healthy, like what does that look like practically, like in the real world?
That's a really good question. Um, let's go into this first. What does healthy tissue look like, and what does unhealthy
Hmm.
tissue look like? So
Okay.
fascia, because it's 70% water, needs to be in more of a liquid gel-like state. And so if your fascia is more like dried ramen noodles, That's how most of us experience our fascia. It is fibrotic, which means that it's fibrous and hard and rigid, that it's dehydrated. It does not have water or any kind of liquid. It's a brittle state, and it's not flexible and doesn't move. Healthy fascia, on the other side, is like ramen noodles that have hot water poured over them. First, the noodles soften, then they individuate, and then they can be pulled apart and flow and what I call animate. So healthy tissue is this like vibrant elasticity, kind of a substance that moves and stretches and pulls. And unhealthy tissue is rigid and solid and formed, very fibrotic. So most people starting around the age of 20 will start to develop some type of what's called glycation. It's a process, a natural oxidative state of aging. And it's kind of akin in your tissues. Glycation can create a condition in your tissues that's like the crystallization in a bowl of honey if you have your honey sitting for too long. When you first stir it, those little crystals can kind of move back in and become mixed, and the honey becomes smooth again. But if you leave that honey too long, more and more crystals accumulate, fibrosis, and the tissues will start to become more rigid and more stuck. And with time, there's no amount of stirring that can actually take that and actually integrate it. So this is the process that we tend to go through. And there's two things that really add to oxidative stress in glycation production. Is sitting is really, really bad for your tissues. Okay. And you've kind of heard that saying, sitting is the new smoking. But also from the physical side, the extreme of also going out and doing really aggressive exercise and really adrenalizing your tissues is also creating oxidative stress through the release of cortisol and other stress hormones. So you have two sides of the extremes that fascia doesn't like: sitting too much and then running to the gym and burning your muscles out trying to get your workout on. The other side can be nutritional. It depends on if you're really, really like missing certain nutrients in your foods and stuff. That can cause glycation. And the other one is not being able to have enough water. And then there's also one other side of our stress loading. And this comes down to, I don't want to go too technical for your listeners, but fascia's main kind of role in the body, it's like a sonic system. It's a hydration system. It's a communication system. It's busy listening and communicating. But in its greatest form, including all of those things, is that it's like this high end quantum fiber communication system. And what it does is it takes input, stress input. We call them loads, whether they're mechanical loads like a workout, lifting heavy things, that's like load from the outside in, or whether it's taking chemical loads from our psychological stresses in a day. And the tissue is constantly trying to flex, the fibers flex with a contraction, and then push that stress through the fibers to metabolize our loads into and eliminate them from our system. Movement becomes the eliminating process that is helping to relieve that load from the body. And so the other thing that causes glycation is high stress lifestyles. When your psychological loads produce a stress chemical cocktail, I call it a cocktail of experience, like 3 shots of adrenaline, 2 shots of cortisol, a shot of vermouth, and it shoots it up and it sends it through your tissues, and fascia contracts. And if you order that regularly, it will actually create surging and contractile issues in the tissues, and that will hold rigid, and rigidity then turns into fibrosis. Fibrosis turns into stress, additional stress on the body. So those are kind of those extremes of both things in lifestyle: the movement side, the mechanical side, and the psychological or the stress side of the tissues.
We really can't get away from bad stress affecting literally everything in our life. It's like it's so important to realize that, because it's even down to our fascia.
Yes.
That is so affected by the stress that we're living with.
Well, here's what it kind of points to.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. What I was going to say, what it kind of points to is that we can't avoid stress. We just have to become masters of metabolizing our stress, of processing it. Whether that's like getting tools to be able to handle our rough emotions and how to actually like have healthy relationships and working on self, right? The mind body continuum is one. Or whether that's learning how to, I say, if you take care of fascia, you take care of your whole body, but you can do it from the physical aspect, which is our health, or you can do it from the mental aspect, which is our wellness. And that's really like just becoming a master of handling your stresses. How do you process them? How do you break them down and eliminate the toxic energy that's left over so you can go on to the next? And that's really what I think even becoming a good human is, right? Is learning how to process our stresses into, more vital life, more vital living.
Yeah, exactly. And having that attitude of like, this isn't something we're ever going to have eliminated from our lives, but
No,
how we cope,
that's
having
right.
those tools to deal with it is going to be everything in this in our life
Everything.
and literally every system in our body. I wanted to ask you about you mentioned movement kind of on the other side. Like of course we
Yeah.
know sitting all
Yeah.
day long is not good, but and I don't want to call out any gyms or anything, but I know there's a lot
We won't
of
point fingers.
we won't. Yeah, I've done them all. I've been there. That's why I can talk from experience. But
Hmm.
I know there's some, and we especially we're talking to our audiences. A lot of people, a lot of women in midlife, right?
Yes.
So they are going to these maybe more extreme workouts, and maybe I want to ask your opinion on it. On this,
Yeah.
is this the extreme movement that you're talking about that can be kind of like
Toxic.
negatively
Yeah.
impacting us? Tell us
Yes.
about like what kind of things you're talking about.
That's a great thing. So let's break it down to two different qualities because everybody knows that movement is good for you, right? Everybody says you need to go and work out and we need to move more. But the problem is that from the sit all day lifestyle to go out and actually like burn through a workout is actually producing stress hormones. They've done a lot of research, and one recently was confirming that these high adrenal workouts, like high cardiovascular hit, I'm not going to call out brands because it's not in my best interest. And it doesn't really matter. So it's what the
Yeah.
chemical cocktail is being created by your movement. And most of these workouts are really focused on the muscular system. And the muscular system is deeply wired into our adrenals and our adrenal stress response. Our muscles, think about it like this, our muscles are our getaway car. When we were supposed to be being chased from a lion, we would run and, try to get away from whatever danger there was. And as soon as that danger was gone, our chemicals are supposed to process and get out of it. If you see a chase of like a antelope and a lion on the Sahara, you will see what happens to the gazelle if he gets away. And the gazelle will twitch and like muscles will be firing, trying to literally, that's fascia, twitching to metabolize the chronic stress hormones that are in the tissues. If you actually end up eating an animal that is stressed, you'll taste it in the muscle tissue of the animal because it's there and it's toxic to the system. My husband's an active hunter, and when he told me that, I'm like, that makes sense. So we
Yeah.
go in and we do these muscle-based workouts that are extremely adrenal, and it leaves a lot of stress in our systems, and it can create adrenal fatigue. It lowers our ability to burn fat. It like erodes our joints because those toxic chemicals go in and they'll eat away at the surface structures of your collagen in the integrity of your tissues. And so that's one side, is how we engage in it, how aggressive we are with our workouts. The second issue is that most, and this is across even like weight training and traditional gym workouts and also into the Pilates and yoga mind body stuff too, is that we're using the wrong biomechanics, it's called, to treat and work with the movement of the human body. So biomechanics was becoming really popular, or was really developed. It's not popular. It was developing right after World War I, when soldiers were coming back from the injured field and they weren't knowing how to rehab, like blown up arms and legs that were broken and missing parts. And so it was at this university on the East Coast where they went in, they said, we need to know how to put this body back together. And they went to engineers, civil engineers, mechanical engineers. And at that time, at the Industrial Revolution, it was really interesting that they were really into mechanics of solid mechanics, like levers and pulleys. And so we looked at the human body and we're like, oh, arm is a lever, muscles are a pulley. And this is how we've kind of gotten all of our training, all the way from military calisthenics, all the way up into our fitness conditioning. And fascia, applying a solid mechanical science to a fluid substance, creates a lot of damage. And so all of a
Mm.
sudden, principles, let's make this practical for the listener. A lot of the principles like solid core, trying to get hard abs, pulling our ribs to our torso and not letting the middle part of our body move, is a big problem for fascia. It interrupts the flux and the flow of the fibers in the tissues. So all of a sudden, we have to go back and start analyzing. It's not just the movement you do, it's how you're doing the movement. You could do a traditional gym workout and it would be less damaging to fascia if you used better mechanics. And you could do your yoga and it would be better for fascia if you would just use new principles of movement and mechanics to do that. So we just need to switch our science from solid mechanics to the laws of fluid dynamics, and it's a different branch of science. And so that's one of the things that people need to learn about this and be like, oh, I need to move more like a water balloon hurled through space than I need to be a stick that's being tossed. It's a very different kind of way of approaching movement.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's so interesting. So I was going to ask this later, but since we're talking about it now, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Maybe you could give us some more practical examples of what that looks like too, because,
Yeah.
and you mentioned Pilates and yoga. In my mind, when I was thinking about fascia, I was like, those are probably really beneficial, but like, tell us how it is it,
Yeah.
and then like how it is too. So we know what we're doing and doing it right.
Great. Well, let's talk about this because fascia needs certain things in order to be activated. Not every movement that you do is actually eliciting the animation and the movement of fascia. So, one of the things that is very important is that there's enough range of motion and free flowing movement. But you'll look at one of the practical tools we're taught in exercise is to hold a position and then start toning and moving our parts. So we stand with our feet over our toes, over our hips, and we tuck our pelvis under and we hold our core, and then we start like loading our biceps. This is called an isolated movement. We have isolations, right? Isolate the deltoid, isolate the bicep to try to target. And fascia's like, don't isolate shit. I need to have you integrate it. I need to have you take that stress load, and instead of only applying it to this one little region, I want you to share it with the whole body. Because fascia is like a net, right? It's like it's what's catching the load. And imagine jumping off of a 6 foot, okay, not 6 foot, a 60-foot building onto a single sheet versus a fireman's net. One is going to save your body, one is going to break your body. And so one of those principles is all throughout our workouts. Hold a position, make it rigid, and then start doing little micro movement parts to tone and try to like isolate this muscle tissue. That's really damaging for fascia. Fascia likes to do huge ranges of motion with lots of stretch and a lot of open connections. It's called open kinetic movement. That's another thing that people need to do. They need to move their core a lot more. Another principle is the solid core myth, which is that holding and developing a solid core and then moving your arms and legs around is actually good for you and creating strength. But really, it actually puts the stress on our shoulders and our hips and on our what they're called distal joints, the not ones closest, sorry, proximal joints, not distant. And that stress is why by 50% of the population is in need of a joint replacement. It's crazy how much we wear and tear on our systems because of these principles that we follow. I think tucking your pelvis to try to create a flat back. One of the worst things that you can do for fascia. It has to do with how the chemicals actually come out of your adrenals that are placed right at your bra line. And your adrenals sit there and secrete hormones. And when you don't, and then they flow down your low back into the dense tissues of your thoracolumbar fascia. We call it your flow field. And those chemicals are supposed to enter into the legs through the base of the pelvis, and then they get distributed by walking and running and being physically active. But when we tuck our pelvis, we're basically pooling all of those stresses into our low back. And that's why most people have low back pain, is because the fibers are overcontracted. They're already dense and rigid, and they need to be able to be offloaded. So stop tucking your pelvis, trying to protect your low back, because it's doing the opposite. Another thing that we're taught is to pull our shoulders down and back. And then everyone's like, why am I having such headaches and neck pain tension? And I have frozen shoulder, and because the shoulder girdle is actually supposed to be trained with upper suspension rather than lower compression. Another principle that we're taught in our movement. So those are a couple of them for people. I think everybody would relate to, like, oh yeah, those are the biggies that are pretty obvious. And it just locks up fascia, because fascia is this integrated body-wide network. And so whenever you try to tighten something, it's almost like you have to think about your body like tubes rather than sticks. And if you take a balloon that's a tube and it's all blown up and you squeeze it, you're vicing the way that energy runs and the air pressurizes through that tube. And your arms and your legs and your torso are all tubes. And when we start tightening and toning everything, you're vicing down, and it contributes to nerve pain. It contributes to dehydration in the tissues. So does that help explain some of it?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
it's so interesting because that is what we've been told. There's a lot of people who are out there saying, and I'm glad you mentioned core because that's like a very popular thing. People want to strengthen their core and they want to strengthen their back. And even my son plays baseball and he was having elbow pain, and his physical therapist was like, he needs to strengthen his core because he's using all upper body to throw, but he's not using like the whole thing. So what do you think about that?
How old is your son?
He's almost 14.
Okay. So he's actually right on the borderline that you'd save him from physical therapy.
Oh.
Because he still has, here's why I'm saying that, is that at 14, there's this huge shift. It's almost like, when you're young and your brain has got tons of neurological connections and then it starts pruning. When you're young, you have tons of movement options. And then if you don't use certain ones, your body starts pruning. You start losing around 14, you lose movement options. And we actually need to keep those movement options in for the body. There's a couple things for your son in particular, but this is to heal everybody. Your arm shouldn't be being tossed from your shoulder. It should be being tossed from deeper into the core at your sternum. This is where fascia actually tells you to move from, not the isolated joint. It has nothing to do with actually tightening your core. It means that you need to stretch your core through wider ranges of motion. Here's a huge difference between fascia and muscles. Muscles say, I need to shorten to strengthen. And fascia says, I need to lengthen to strengthen. So here's how that works. Think about a Chinese finger toy. We'll come back to your son's shoulder in a minute. You think about a Chinese finger toy that's like a tube a woven tube. You stick your fingers in and the fibers loosen. You pull your fingers apart and the fibers tighten. This is the way that fascia gets its strength, is because it's formed in tubes. It organizes tubes into your muscles. It organizes tubes into the bone. So it helps to structure, to think of those tubes. The longer that you pull fascia, it's almost like you're locking your fingers and it gets strength without having to engage the muscular system. So this comes back to your son. When you want to train your shoulder to have more support, you actually have to train your spine to be able to work through broader ranges of motion, more stretch, more throw rather than
right.
Right? Can you see that on our listeners? They're not seeing this. What I was demonstrating is a whiplash action in my spine versus holding my torso and just whipping my arm. Then you can see that this is where the stress is versus this is where it comes from. And if they learn how to use their lat correctly, they will not have problems with their shoulders. So there's a lot of exercises that he can do, but it's not necessarily training solid core, which pulls to the center of the body and leaves the shoulder very susceptible to hypermobility. It's making your torso stretch to meet the range of motion that's happening in the shoulder. Really different principles of training. Fascia focused, length before strength. Muscle focused, shortness and strength in compromising length. And that's usually where people get torn in their ligaments and joints and stuff.
So it feels just like, even just like you demonstrating, it feels like more like fluid and like flowy than short and like
tight and rigid. Yeah.
Tight. Yeah. So
I'm think about this though. I know we're all taught wrong. And it's not about pointing fingers as much as it's just time to evolve. Right? Like we need to learn these principles and just replace them. Be like, oh yeah, that's old. This is new. And we're really agile in certain ways and we're really protective in other ways. And what's interesting is that most of our training is mimicking very much stress posturing. So think about what we do when we're stressed. Our diaphragm closes, our chest pulls in and tightens, our pelvis goes under. We go into protective, think about a boxer. They always crunch and contract their center to try to protect. But if you do that in your workout, you're naturally creating what's called a stress load, a chemical stress load, because the body will start producing the same chemicals in the opposite direction. Have you ever heard of Amy Cuddy's work? She is a really wonderful sociologist. And she was like, why is it that humans throw their arms up at the end of a race that they've won? What is chemically happening that it's like, this is the victory stance? And she's like, I wonder if we could create the same chemical response without running the race, just by putting our hands up. So she was really kind of a leader in this field of the reverse is true, that if I use my body in a certain way, I can elicit the same chemical response. And she came up with power stances. If you've learned of any of the corporate
Yeah.
kind of stuff, like power stances are supposed to elicit a physiological change in your body. But we do the opposite. We go in and we do workouts that completely stress our bodies and create a chemical reaction of stress in our lives. We don't need that. We need,
Yeah.
if we live stressed in our lives, we should go and do a movement sequence that is the catalyst and the opposite to it, that is the antidote to the stress posturing that we do. And that comes from arching your spine, opening your ribs, lifting your chest, moving your spine, right? Because all stress hormones shut us in and bring us into a ball of stress. And all the other fascia is linked into endorphins. So when you want to work
Mm.
to access endorphin based stuff, you have to trigger the fascia, and it will actually be an antidote, a chemical antidote for the muscular adrenal system. It's pretty fascinating.
That's so interesting. And I know it's like open is such a good word, because it's like when you're demonstrating here, I'll have to show videos of this.
Yeah.
You're opening your body's, and when you do the other one, it's like the opposite. It's so interesting.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Everybody should try that at home and just see what their body feels. Another big thing is that fascia is a communication system, and it's your body's organ of consciousness, the way your brain is the organ of mind consciousness. And so when you start to go in and feel what feels good, where you're sitting right now listening to the podcast, try to like pull your knees to your chest and just like close up like your fetal position. Feel what that does to your body. Now, fly your arms open and your legs open and arch over the chair wherever you're sitting. What does that do? Those are two extremes. One feels one way and one feels the other. One is much more like non-stress parasympathetic response. It stretches the vagus nerve. It helps to put you into a non-stress mode. And the other one brings you into this like, you can almost elicit anxiety type feelings by doing tons of this like contracting in. Anyway, it's a very fascinating. I love physiology.
It's so interesting. So
Yeah.
you did mention like a couple negative like consequences, I guess, if for having that dehydrated fascia that's like the ramen noodles that haven't been put water over. What are some other like reasons or ways that we can see a negative impact? You also talked about we can have joint surgery because of this.
Yes.
What are some other negative consequences?
Great question. So the fascial microbiome. So they're starting to find these microbiomes. There's one, our first one that we know about is in our gut. And I just read an article on the brain microbiome and what that means to us. And there's a fascial microbiome, and it's basically saying what is the environment that is optimal inside this area for there to be vitality and life. And it's isolated from these other things. And the fascial microbiome is really connected to our inflammatory response. And so when there is chronic stress into our fascia and the connective tissue system, it has been linked to autoimmune issues like Hashimoto's, connective tissue diseases, Crohn's disease, MS. It really influences a lot of other different systems because fascia is everywhere. And that's kind of what came down to my story is I had all of these mixed symptoms. It wasn't just my muscles and my bones that were like full of pain and diagnosed with fibromyalgia. And it was like my guts where I have horrible digestive issues, and I diagnosed with everything IBS, and they thought I had diverticulitis. Then I had none of that, all of that was fixed by dealing with the fascia. The biggest, scariest was my respiratory system was super compromised. And they're like, but you don't have asthma, but you don't have this, but you don't have. And I was like, I was 18, and why do I have all of these really complicated, like multi-layered symptomatic things? And you're all telling me that they're not related. And so when I went back and really discovered fascia and started healing my fascia, which was very damaged, even at the young age of 18, all of a sudden these symptoms started to lighten up. So you can say that if you are struggling with something in your health, put this on your radar, because I'm guaranteeing that in some way your fascia is connected. It can be anything. They're finding that there's relationships between the health of fascia and the metastasis of cancers. That when your fascia is super enmeshed and becomes less netted, less individuated, cells can actually, like, that were supposed to be stopped from getting into one area of the body, can actually skate across fibrotic tissue because there's no meshing and enter into other areas of the body. So it's like so vast. And I want to say that none of this is like super conclusive. It's all just starting to come out and being like, okay, what else does it do? What else does it do? Because it's really a very new science. People are still researching and being like, okay, I think that this is a bigger deal. And so if people that listeners are having stuff that they haven't been able to find answers to, they should do a deep dive into the connective tissue system, because it's connected to everything and it's touching, if not influencing, part of whatever your symptoms are.
It's, oh my gosh. I mean, it's literally called connective tissue.
Tissue.
So
I know.
I mean, so now that we know this is very serious, like we need to pay attention to this.
It's a big deal. I mean, it's a big deal.
It is. This is huge. Yes. And this is great. Like if you are having things and you get, there's so many people, and me included, I've been on my own health journey, that are stuck. They're like, this is my issue. I can't get a solution. And when they hear this is something to look into. It's a very real thing that can cause a bunch of issues. So where do we start? Let's give them some good news. Like, what can we do? And I'd love
you don't want me to be the Grim Reaper? What is wrong with you?
No, I'm like, let's turn this
Lay
around.
It on thick and let's do it. That's
but I feel, and I want to know also, like, how do you help your clients? And you have amazing like results with your clients. Where do we start? And then you can tell us, like, what do you do to help people get this tissue healthy?
Great. So the first and most simple thing is that people need to realize that movement has to be microdosed throughout their day. Fascia doesn't like a 60-minute hardcore meal of movement. We don't do that with our diets. We don't do it with our nutrition. We should not do it with movement. And what that looks like is that people need to look around their world and find that their world is like their jungle gym. There's places to hang off of, to pull from, to twist with, and they need to do it once an hour for 30 seconds. This is a certain baseline basal metabolic activity that the tissue needs to stay vital and healthy. And so there's 3 different movements that you need to do regularly throughout your day in little micro doses. They are called compression, traction, and rotation. Okay? Compression is like pushing the syringe and the plunger down into the syringe. It pushes water out through the system. Traction is like pulling fresh water in to the system. And then rotation is like wringing it out. And it does a little bit of both, because when your fibers twist, one side is like a helix and it compresses and the other one tractions. So what does this look like? You wake up, your coffee pot is brewing, you go to your kitchen sink, you put your toes at the base of your kitchen sink and your hands on the edge. This is if your kitchen sink has space to move back before your butt hits the aisle or the island. You're going to grab onto the kitchen sink, and I want you to bend your knees and just pull back in traction as far as you can into space. Your spine is supposed to interdigit and pull and lengthen and pull and lengthen. Then you come up forward and you're going to come back to the front and you're going to do like a cobra, arching. And this is traction. It's stretching your front body and giving looseness to your back body. It helps to open the diaphragm. It helps to put you in a parasympathetic response. That traction brings new water into the system. Do and repeat that 5 times. Pull back like you're water skiing. Your butt's going back. You feel like your head is pulling out. We have a video that you can link to in your show notes for people to see what this is. And then you pull forward, arching your back. And you do this like 5 or 6 times. Compression and traction, compression and traction. You can try pulling your butt down to the floor. Are you going to show this video?
I'll show this video.
If you want, I'll just show it to you here. So traction pulls back, hanging off the sink like this. Traction.
Okay.
Then you come back and you arch forward and you lift. And then you pull back. You can even do it where you go into a primal squat. This is compression. And then this is traction, coming up and forward and lifting and arching your chest, which stretches your whole back line. Then at the very end, you need to rotate. And you need to lift your ribs and keep your chest rotated. Do it 8 times and then walk on with your day. Those three exercises can be done when you go to the sink to wash your hands at your office. They can do it off of a parking meter before you get in your car, or at the end of your bumper when you're filling your car with gas. This should be starting to be a park bench when you're walking your dog, a fence when you're waiting for your son's baseball. Grab onto the chain link fence, fingers through, and do your traction. People are like doing that regularly throughout your day sets a really good baseline for your tissue, because fascia really needs to squeeze to get the toxins out, refill, kind of think like a sponge, and then rotate, squeeze, lift, and rotate. And that's how it's going to move it. And then what I try to do is I teach people, the next step is layering it into their lives. And then we go in and we really try to unravel damage that's been done. That's a little bit more of an intricate process, but we follow that same kind of a thing. And the fascia has a very beautiful and unique thing about it, that it has a cell that contracts. Similar to the way your muscles can contract, it has less power than a muscle, but it can contract in a very subtle way. And most people's ability to contract, we call it the fascia flux. Muscles flex and fascia fluxes, is controlled on choice. Just like when I say blink, you can blink. If I say move your arm, it's part of a somatic. It's called a somatic body function. Most people's fascia is damaged to most degree that their tissue is inanimate, meaning it doesn't actually flux to send the energy through the fibers. And we have to restore that. Some of what I just described can be restored, like turning the honey in the jar. Remember, like those little micro movements I just shared are to do throughout the day, stirs the glycation and the honey crystals back in. But some people are in more need of care than just that. And that would come down to opening the core, really opening the core, getting your organs moving. Most people's visceral motility is shot. Organs are supposed to contract as it moves food through. It synchronizes with the esophagus as you eat, and it goes down and it creates this pattern of movement. Most people, from sitting and slouching and stress posturing, have lost a lot of their visceral motility, and hence why the microbiome is shot, and how there's a lot of different digestive issues as well as like weight stuff. So I usually try to get people to start opening up their chest. Getting their organs to move is really important for total body health, obviously. And then we can focus more on like the muscular skeletal issues too. That's kind of more into like the physical therapy realm versus the osteopathic realm. Two different, specialties of body care that deal with fascia. So, but we use those same three elements, right? These principles of fluid dynamics to get the body to have as many movement options as possible. Most of us have lost, like I said, your son, we're born with over 300 anatomical moving options. And by the time that we're 20, most humans have less than 30.
Wow.
That's right. And so it's a big cataclysmic loss in terms of our ability to just freely move. And the fascia think about how it's like it relies on movement as an agitator and facilitator of moving the tension through us. So that's how I kind of go in and approach most things, is that if you deal with the fascia, most symptoms are already, I call it a source system, right? Your nervous system is a source system, fascia is a source system, the connective tissue system, and your circulatory. They are everywhere, touching everything, and they're usually where the source of our illnesses and diseases are, rather than the symptoms that are shown in the various parts.
So this is going to help, like you said, like boost mobility and everything like that. But is this also, if you're really healthy with your fascia, does that mean you're also like really flexible, or is that kind of separate?
No, it is. That's true. Flexibility is a tricky thing, because flexibility does not also translate into mobility and doesn't translate into agility. So those three things, like you can be very flexible and not have strength, not be able to coordinate your movements well. Fascia kind of does all of those three things, especially as we age, is it keeps agility, mobility, and flexibility. Think maybe that flexibility is in your muscle tissues and your ligaments. Mobility is mostly in your joints. And then agility is the combination of how those come out in pattern synchronized movements to be able to coordinate and avoid injury, avoid falling when you're, as you age.
Yeah.
Cognitive decline comes from lack of movement and three-dimensional space for the brain. So yeah, it does. What's interesting is that fascia, think about it this way. most of the fascia work will feel like a stretch because we're crumpled up. Most of our lifestyles just crumple us up into tight little nuggets of tight stress wad. So when you do GST or the fascia work that I do, it feels like a stretch. However, there's a difference between just stretching fascia and animating it, which is also something that, is another conversation, because I think people are starting to get into the stretch of fascia, but it doesn't mean that it's actually stretch is like pulling a rubber band and letting it go. And fascial animation is taking the stretch and letting it fly through the air, right? There's this quality of energetic release that happens. So um, there are most people who benefit the most people who are inflexible will benefit the most from fascia, people who have stretched their whole life. I stretched as a dancer every day of my life and I never got more flexible. Until I started stretching with fascial principles, because
Oh,
fascia regulates the length and the tensile stress that a muscle can endure. It's the regulator of energy to a muscle. So if people are super flexible, you can actually train the fascia to help with the strength, because they need to actually not, that's one of the myths, is that they take flexible people and try to make them rigid, thinking that it's going to help their flexibility. And I have rehabbed so many like hypermobile people because they are taught to tighten their muscles, which actually doesn't actually help with their stability. So fascia can help with hypermobility, but with definite, like very specialized techniques to help train it.
that's awesome. Okay, so you are so amazing, by the way. Like,
Oh,
this is so helpful.
thank
Like,
you.
the way you break everything down. I'm learning so much. So,
Oh my gosh,
tell us more
thanks.
about GST,
Oh
your
yeah.
company, and like what you do. People are going to want to come and find you. So, tell us a little bit about that and
Cool.
how they can work with
Yeah.
you.
Cool. Well, it's interesting that you said the way you heard about fascia was through manual therapy. And
Yeah,
I love manual therapy. We have a style of manual therapy. Fascia is very much into manual therapy. Well, what I found in my own journey is that manual therapy I couldn't get a practitioner enough. I couldn't afford it to have them rub on me constantly to make me feel better and stuff. So early on, I was like, I have to figure out how to make a therapeutic thing happen through my own movement. As a dancer, I would like go out and dance and ruin my body and then have to go to the therapies to try to make it feel better. And I'm like, what if my movement wasn't doing the damage and I could do something else? So the story of GST is that we actually use movement to manipulate the tissue because it's the greatest influence and has the most influence over fascial health. And so instead of having to go to someone for you to push in on your tissues, it's nice. I love it. Don't get me wrong. But if you really have trauma in your tissues, it's not enough. It doesn't apply
yeah.
enough pressure. It doesn't happen with enough repetition, and it doesn't have all of the different types of intensity. So GST is a movement system that remodels your connective tissue from cell to structure. And this is really significant because that's where you really start to see the changes and not doing just medicinal, like taking care of symptoms. You actually get to go to the source of where the fibers are adhered, why they are rigid and need of restructuring. Fascia actually restructures quite quickly. Within about 7 months, they're finding that intermuscular fascia is restored within 7 months. And that's a huge like bonus. Talk about good news for your listener. If you have fascial damage, it doesn't have to be forever to try to get it to remodel. But if you learn how to do it with your movement, you're moving all day long. You can just be more mindful about putting the nutritional qualities. It's almost like changing our mentality of food to what we do with our movement and being like little snacks, and I should move like this, I should be eating these or moving with these nutritional qualities. And that's what GST does, is it's got this biotech that breaks down the 5 elements that influence fascia the greatest, and then we teach people how to implement these techniques and technology, specifically the fascial flux, how it moves, where it's supposed to lead to, and so that you are feeding force correctly to create a difference in the remodeling of your structure. So it feels like a deep tissue massage and a workout all at the same time. And it's really nutritiously bioavailable to your body. So that's what we do. And you can do it online. We have classes I teach every day of the week. And we have programs, and we have an online studio for people who just want to like try it out and visit it. Because I think that with this, what I'm talking about is so new that there's kind of a tiny learning curve, right? You can't just turn on a TV and follow, who is the, Jane Fonda. It's not a follow along. It's a deeply embodied thing. And so what we're trying to do is create awareness for, moving better, not just moving more. Right now, everyone's like, I got 10,000 steps. And you're like, wah, wah. It's like, I ate only 10,000 calories, but they were all, shit versus really good nutritional food. So we're trying to kind of raise awareness and also give people tools to heal themselves, because in the long run, freedom and health is about not being dependent on anybody, really, and being able to know what's right for you and what's good for you, rather than always being like, tell me what to do. I'll just do whatever you want. It's like, so it's an education, and it's a chance for people to really own their health, and it radically changes their lives, I think.
That's amazing. Well, yeah, and it's so empowering too to take that power and figure it out and get healthy. And I can't wait to check out wait to check it out. And this has been so amazing. I really appreciate you sharing all of this with us. This is fascinating.
Thanks for having me.
It's so helpful. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. I loved it.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Please subscribe and review so we can reach more people who want to learn to glow alongside us. See you next time.